Hello, dear listeners of Sci-fi Stories. We are incredibly grateful for your continued support of our channel. Recently, YouTube has disabled our monetization features, leaving us without the budget needed to keep our operations running and our staff paid. If you enjoy today's story, please consider supporting us with just $1 by scanning the PayPal QR code on your screen or clicking the link in the description or pinned comment, so we can continue bringing you amazing sci-fi adventures. The silence in the Grand Chamber was absolute, heavy with a terror none of the supreme leaders dared to voice. On the massive central projection, a single, unregistered vessel of unknown design drifted lazily through the vacuum. It had no cannons, no plasma batteries, and no energy shields. Yet, in the span of 3 seconds, this insignificant anomaly had completely erased the pride of the Ethelgard Empire. The Supreme Council of the Ethelgard Empire convened in an emergency session, casting long, sharp shadows across the cold, metallic floor of the Absolute Command Spire. The air was frigid, intentionally kept at freezing temperatures to ensure maximum cognitive function for the 7 ruling oligarchs. But today, the chill in their spines did not come from the environmental controls. It came from the repeating holographic playback floating in the center of the vast circular room. They were watching the total annihilation of the Seventh Fleet. The incident had occurred at the outermost rim of the Imperial territory, a sector definitively marked as a fully secured safe zone for the past 10,000 cycles. The target that had triggered the fleet engagement protocol was absurd. It was merely a single, unregistered vessel. Its geometric structure defied every known principle of aerodynamic or void combat engineering. It looked less like a warship and more like a jagged asymmetrical shard of raw dark matter, roughly hewn and utterly devoid of visible propulsion systems. Grand Admiral Kale stared at the projection, his 4 eyes blinking in unsynchronized disbelief. "Play the combat sequence again," he commanded, his voice echoing sharply off the high ceilings. At 1/4 speed, the tactical readout refreshed. A swarm of 200 heavily armored Imperial dreadnoughts surrounded the solitary shard. The Ethelgard ships charged their primary plasma lances and antimatter torpedoes. But before a single shot could be fired, the anomaly reacted. The vessel, commanded by a lone biological entity they would later identify through a primitive communications echo as Andre Arnold, did not fire back. It possessed no thermal lasers. It housed no plasma accelerators. It lacked any of the conventional armaments that defined interstellar supremacy. Instead, it weaponized the vacuum of space itself. The sensors recorded a sudden, impossible inversion of the local gravitational constant. The vessel did not project energy outward. It folded the fabric of reality inward. A localized gravity paradox bloomed silently in the heart of the Imperial formation. The vacuum tore open, creating a micro-singularity that demanded feeding. The superfleet of the Ethelgard Empire, a force capable of subjugating entire star systems, was simply crushed. The magnificent dreadnoughts snapped like brittle twigs. Their ultra-dense armor plating caved inward, collapsing upon their own reactor cores before being swallowed into the spatial tear. In the span of 3 heartbeats, 200 warships ceased to exist, leaving absolutely no debris behind. Silence reigned in the command spire. No one breathed. The sheer logic of the event was impossible to process. Physics, as they understood it, had been casually dismissed by a single, jagged ship. "Play the combat sequence again at 1/10 speed," the High Executor ordered, leaning forward until his face was bathed in the harsh, blue light of the tactical display. The projection reset. The dreadnoughts appeared again, their engines flaring with raw, aggressive power. Then came the spatial distortion. At this extreme slow motion, the Council could see the exact moment the localized physics broke down. Space did not merely bend. It shattered like glass. The gravitational paradox cascaded through the Imperial fleet, catching the ships in an invisible, omnidirectional vice. Chief Intelligence Officer Vex stepped forward, his data slate trembling slightly in his grip. "My lords," Vex began, his tone uncharacteristically hesitant, "we have run the structural and energetic signature of the anomaly through the contemporary archives. We found zero matches. I was forced to initiate a deep dive into the restricted ancient databases, correlating the spatial folding patterns with pre-expansion mythologies." Vex swiped his hand across the air, replacing the horrifying footage of the fleet destruction with a series of archaic, two-dimensional text files and crude biological schematics. The technology, or rather, the fundamental understanding of reality displayed here, belongs to a species classified in our oldest records as humanity, Vex stated, the word feeling foreign and awkward on his tongue. The oligarchs shifted uncomfortably in their hovering thrones. "Humanity," the High Executor demanded, his tone dripping with a mixture of skepticism and sudden, unnameable dread. "That is a Tier 1 primitive species. Our historical databanks clearly state they wiped themselves out in a localized ecological disaster, entirely restricted to their native mudball of a planet over 12,000 cycles ago. They did not even possess stable, faster-than-light travel." "That was the accepted historical consensus," Vex replied, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "But the data is undeniable. The telemetry signature matches the theoretical models of human quantum engineering theories found in the dead archives. They did not go extinct. They simply went silent." Vex brought up a side-by-side comparison. On the left, the telemetry of the shattered space. On the right, archaic mathematical equations recovered from a crashed probe predating the Empire itself. "Notice the fractal patterns in the singularity collapse," Vex pointed out, tracing the glowing lines. "Our weapons rely on outward explosive force. This relies on an elegant, terrifying understanding of the foundational strings of the universe. The commander of this vessel, this Andre Arnold, did not execute a firing solution. He executed a mathematical proof, and the result was the deletion of our fleet." A profound, paralyzing panic began to take root in the absolute command spire. The cold logic of the Ethelgard Empire was fracturing under the weight of this revelation. The oligarchs realized with sickening clarity that while the Empire had spent millennia conquering the physical galaxy with brute force and plasma fire, humanity had chosen a different path. They had not perished in their poisoned atmosphere. They had retreated into the dark, evolving in absolute secrecy, shedding the limitations of conventional technology to master and manipulate the very laws of physics. They had become something else entirely, and now they were casually drifting through imperial space, holding the power to erase reality at their fingertips. The void of deep space offered no sanctuary, only a vast and indifferent ocean where predators hunted unseen. Val, holding the title of resolute assassin, sat perfectly still within the sensory deprivation gel of his command pod. He was the most lethal instrument in the Imperial covert arsenal, entrusted with the Nightshade, a stealth interceptor so advanced it theoretically did not exist on any Imperial ledger. His mandate from the Supreme Council was absolute. Track the anomaly, analyze its propulsion matrix, capture the technology if possible, execute the biological entity known as Andre Arnold if necessary. Vile mentally interfaced with the tactical grid of his ship, pushing the quantum sensors to their absolute limits. Conventional tracking was entirely useless. The human vessel had not fled the massacre site using standard warp drives or hyperlanes. It had simply slipped through the cracks of reality. Standard starships bled thermal radiation, expelled ion exhaust, and displaced tachyon particles. The vessel Vale hunted did none of these things. For 3 standard orbital cycles, Vile chased ghosts. He sifted through the cosmic background radiation, ignoring the deafening white noise of a billion distant stars, searching for a whisper. He finally found it, not as a spike of heat, but as an absence. It was a microscopic tear in the local gravitational field, a tiny pocket of bent, dark gravity, no larger than a grain of sand. It was a footprint left by something massive, resting entirely outside the standard physical plane. "Adjust heading to intercept the anomaly," Vial whispered to the onboard intelligence, his voice raspy in the cold air of the cockpit. "Maximum silent running." He followed the microscopic gravitational warps, stringing them together like pearls on a pitch-black thread. The hunt demanded absolute perfection. Yet, as the hours bled into days, a creeping unease began to settle over his highly disciplined mind. The trail was incredibly difficult to find, but once located, the intervals between the gravitational footprints were meticulously regular, exactly 100,000 kilometers apart. The precision was not a byproduct of propulsion. It was deliberate. It was a breadcrumb trail. Vial realized this precisely at the moment the trail ended. The nightshade dropped out of its slipstream state, its cloaking field shimmering slightly as it entered the physical space of a stellar graveyard. According to the imperial star charts, this was the terminus of a long, dead star system. A place where a red giant had supposedly collapsed into a lifeless brown dwarf millions of years ago. There was nothing here but freezing dust and dead rock. Vial scanned the emptiness. The visual feeds showed absolutely nothing, but the mass sensors began to scream a silent and urgent warning directly into his neural link. The mathematical mass of the sector did not align with the visual data. There was far too much gravity, a gravitational pull equivalent to a supermassive star. Yet there was zero light emitting from the center of the system. "Run a dark matter refraction sweep," Vale commanded, feeling a cold sweat break out across his brow. The sensors washed the sector in synthetic tachyon pulses, analyzing how the dark matter bent around hidden objects. Slowly and horrifyingly, the truth materialized on his tactical display. The dead star system was a lie. The dark matter was not naturally occurring. It was a synthetic shroud, a perfect camouflage woven on a planetary scale. Beneath that impenetrable veil of nothingness lay a superstructure of impossible proportions. It was a Dyson sphere, entirely enclosing a captive and fiercely burning star, harnessing 100% of its energy output. The Empire had believed humanity was a primitive footnote in history. Instead, they had built a machine the size of a solar system, hiding it perfectly right on the edge of the Imperial border. Before Vale could even formulate a retreat protocol, the impossible happened. The Nightshade operated on an entirely closed-loop, quantum-encrypted communication network. It was physically severed from the outside universe to prevent exactly what occurred next. The ambient lighting in the cockpit shifted from tactical blue to a soft and organic amber. The primary monitors flickered, overriding his neural commands. The silence of the void was suddenly broken by a clear and unhurried voice echoing through the internal speakers of the ship. "You followed the path exactly as I calculated. Resolute assassin Vial. Your persistence is commendable, though entirely predictable." Vial froze. The voice was not speaking standard Imperial Basic. It was speaking the high ethereal tongue, the ancient and sacred dialect of the founding fathers of the Empire, a language unspoken for over 5,000 years. And it was speaking it fluently, without the sterile and mechanical cadence of an artificial translator. "Who are you?" Vial demanded, his hands flying across the manual overrides, finding them all locked down. "How have you breached a closed quantum state?" "I am Andre Arnold," the voice replied, the ancient syllables rolling smoothly through the cabin. "As for your network, you are thinking in terms of digital intrusion. I did not hack your systems. I simply altered the probability of your communication array receiving my specific frequency. You are inside my space now." "You lured me here," Vial stated, his mind racing to analyze the tactical nightmare. "A trap." "An invitation," Andre corrected mildly. Your empire has grown increasingly erratic. We have watched you for 700 years. Val, we watched you burn the outer colonies. We watched you strip mine the asteroid belts. We watched you conquer with the crude arrogance of children playing with fire. If you possess this level of technology, Vial countered, gesturing toward the unseen Dyson sphere. Why hide? Why not conquer us? A low and humorless sound that might have been a sigh emanated from the speakers. Conquest is a primitive urge, a symptom of resource scarcity and fear. We outgrew it millennia ago. We did not build this sphere, nor the thousands of others like it across the galactic rim, to prepare for war. Then what are they for? They are the pillars of a wall, Andre said, the ancient language lending a heavy and prophetic weight to the words. A spatial barrier spanning over 75 light years. We have not been hiding from you, Vial. We have been quietly building a quarantine zone around your entire empire. We isolated you, carefully managing the spatial currents, so you would never stray too far from your own nursery. Vale felt the breath leave his lungs. The entire history of imperial expansion, every glorious conquest, every mapped sector, was nothing but a carefully curated illusion. They were not the masters of the galaxy. They were completely contained, manipulated by a force that had been patiently building an invisible cage around them for centuries. The transition was entirely devoid of kinetic force. There was no blinding flash of energy, no jarring shockwave of a transporter beam tearing his molecules apart. 1 microsecond. Vial was gripping the controls of the Nightshade, his mind perfectly synced with the lethal machinery of the Empire. The next microsecond, the cockpit simply ceased to be around him. The fabric of space had been neatly sheared with the precision of a scalpel, removing him from his ship and depositing him elsewhere without displacing a single breath of air. Vial stumbled, his combat reflexes instantly triggering. He dropped into a defensive crouch, his hands reaching for neuroblades that were no longer strapped to his waist. He was standing inside the anomaly. He expected the cold, sterile hum of a hyper-advanced war room, perhaps banks of quantum computers, or the intimidating glow of a dark matter reactor core. Instead, the environment defied every architectural principle of Ethelgard engineering. The floor beneath his boots was not metallic, but possessed a subtle, resilient give, like walking on a dense layer of muscle tissue. The bulkheads surrounding him were not welded plates of titanium. They were curved, organic structures, pulsating slowly with a rhythmic, breathing cadence. Veins of luminescent fluid, shimmering with the unpredictable light of quantum probability, coursed beneath a translucent, skin-like membrane on the walls. It was a living, breathing entity, a seamless amalgamation of biological life and quantum mechanics. The entire vessel was a single, conscious organism. Vial felt a suffocating pressure in his chest. His entire existence was defined by finding the weak point in a machine, the cooling vent, the command deck, the power relay. Here, there was nothing to sabotage. He was standing inside the belly of a god. Your heart rate is dangerously elevated. Resolute assassin, a voice noted calmly. Vial spun around. Standing a few paces away was a figure that shattered his expectations yet again. If humanity possessed the power to cage star systems, Vial anticipated a being of terrifying majesty, perhaps a cybernetic warlord or an ascended energy being. The man before him looked incredibly, almost insultingly, ordinary. He wore a simple, unadorned coverall woven from a matte, non-reflective fabric. There were no insignias of rank, no medals of conquest, no visible augments. He looked like a laborer. "You are Andre Arnold," Vial stated, forcing his voice to remain steady, masking the deep psychological tremor shaking his foundation. "Supreme commander of this vessel, state your military hierarchy." A faint, almost weary smile touched Andre's face. "Military hierarchy? Vial, Your perspective is tragically limited by the culture of your empire. I am not a general. I am not a warrior. I do not hold a rank of conquest. Do not lie to me, Vale hissed, his eyes darting around the organic chamber. You commanded a vessel that eradicated 200 dreadnoughts in 3 seconds. You engineered a spatial quarantine spanning dozens of light years. You are their apex commander. I am a sanitation worker, Andre replied flatly. A low-tier border patrolman. My primary directive is cosmic debris management and maintaining the structural integrity of the dark matter scaffolding. I am a garbage collector. Vial. The words struck the assassin harder than a physical blow. The pride of the Ethelgard Empire, the mighty Seventh Fleet, had been annihilated by a janitor. Vial experienced a profound vertigo, a sudden collapse of the cosmic order he had sworn his life to protect. If this was the power of their lowest caste, what were the rest of them capable of? Vial swallowed hard, trying to reconcile the impossible. Your weapon, the singularity generator that crushed our ships. How does a sanitation worker possess a weapon of mass extinction? Andre shook his head, a gesture of profound pity. There was no weapon. We abandoned offensive armaments thousands of cycles ago. What your sensors recorded was not an attack. It was a localized symmetrical reaction. A basic hazard avoidance reflex. Vial stared, his mind struggling to process the concept. A reflex. Your fleet locked their targeting arrays and fired high-yield plasma directly into my ship's primary navigational deflector shield. Andre explained, his tone resembling a teacher explaining basic physics to a child. The shield simply reflected the kinetic and thermal energy back at the source, folding the space to ensure my vessel was not scratched by the debris. Your grand fleet committed suicide by throwing stones at a mirror. My ship merely adjusted its posture so the ricochet would not stain the hull. The absolute futility of the Empire's might crashed down upon Vial. They were insects, violently hurling themselves against an impenetrable glass window. If you are so vastly superior, Vial demanded, his voice cracking with a mixture of anger and despair. Why build the wall? Why trap us? Why not just crush us and take our worlds? Andre stepped closer, and for the first time, the calm demeanor cracked, revealing a vast, ancient exhaustion. Because you are loud, Vial, your empire screams into the dark. Every plasma bombardment, every warp core detonation, every aggressive expansion ripples through the quantum foam. And the dark is not empty. Andre waved a hand, and the organic wall beside them shifted, turning transparent to reveal the inky blackness of the void. We did not build the quarantine zone to protect ourselves from you. We built it to protect you from what is coming. What is coming? Vial breathed, drawn to the window. There is a trans-dimensional entity, Andre said, his voice dropping to a grim whisper. A cosmic parasite that drifts between the membranes of reality. It feeds on aggressive, high-energy signatures. It consumes entire civilizations that burn too bright and too violently. Humanity learned this the hard way during our early expansion. We adapted. We learned to walk softly. Andre pointed into the abyss. Your Seventh Fleet was conducting live fire exercises near the edge of the quarantine zone. Their energy spikes were tearing at the fabric of the dark matter shroud. I had to let my ship neutralize them silently. If I had allowed their plasma fire to continue, it would have acted as a flare, piercing the veil and drawing the parasite directly to your core worlds. The Empire would have been consumed in a matter of days. You were not attacked, Vel. You were silenced, for your own survival. Vial materialized on the polished floor of the Absolute Command Spire just as abruptly as he had been taken. He was completely unharmed, his weapons securely fastened, his hands clutching a crystalline data drive. This drive contained the complete, encrypted telemetry of the quarantine zone, the structural analysis of the Dyson spheres, and the apocalyptic warning from the human, known as Andre Arnold. Vale stood alone before the 7 ruling oligarchs, the freezing air of the chamber biting at his skin as he delivered a truth meant to shatter their arrogant reality. He detailed his encounter within the biological vessel, explained the true nature of the barrier, and conveyed the terrifying existence of the transdimensional parasite that fed on the energy of aggressive civilizations. The silence that followed his exhaustive report was not born of profound realization, but of a deeply wounded, dangerous pride. "A sanitation worker," Grand Admiral Kyle finally spat, the words dripping with absolute venom as he slammed his fist onto the metallic console. "You expect the Supreme Council to believe that the mighty Ethelgard Empire is being treated as an infant in a playpen by a human garbage collector? It is not an insult, my lords. It is our salvation," Vael pleaded, stepping forward. "The data on that drive is raw and unfiltered. You can see the mathematical models of the cosmic parasite. If we breach that dark matter veil, we will draw its attention. We will be consumed." The High Executor leaned forward, his face twisted in a sneer of absolute denial. Fear is a toxic catalyst, and in the minds of the oligarchs, fear of losing their absolute supremacy instantly morphed into aggressive paranoia. To accept Vael and his report meant accepting that the Empire was weak, contained, and irrelevant on the cosmic scale. Their twisted logic spun the narrative to fit their boundless avarice. "This is a sophisticated psychological operation," the High Executor declared, his voice booming across the chamber. "The humans are a frail, coward species hiding behind shadows and parlor tricks. They possess massive spatial resources, endless Dyson spheres harnessing the power of entire stars, and they want to keep it all for themselves. This entire story of a cosmic parasite is a pathetic hoax designed to terrify us into compliance." "You are blinded by your own arrogance," Vael shouted, entirely abandoning Imperial protocol. "If you attack that wall, you are condemning us all to extinction." The High Executor merely gestured to the heavily armed royal guard stationed at the perimeter. "The resolute assassin has been compromised. His mind has been infected by human propaganda. Strip him of his rank and confine him to the subterranean detention levels." As the guards seized Vael, dragging him toward the heavy iron doors, the High Executor issued a command that sealed their fate. "Initiate the Annihilation Protocol. Mobilize the absolute entirety of the Imperial Armada. Assemble 10,000 dreadnoughts and march them directly upon the human barricade. We will shatter their wall and claim their stars." Vael fought desperately against his captors, screaming warnings until the pitch-black iron doors of the deepest dungeon slammed shut, trapping him in silent darkness, even miles beneath the planetary crust. Vael could feel the seismic tremors as the Annihilation Protocol took effect. 10,000 massive warships were igniting their engines, preparing to march toward their own doom. Light years away, bathed in the soft amber glow of his living ship, Andre Arnold watched the tragedy unfold in real time. The quantum probability network embedded within the dark matter scaffolding transmitted the exact movements of the Imperial Armada directly to his visual cortex. The interface displayed a massive, aggressive swarm of red icons converging upon the delicate quarantine border. Andre felt a profound, heavy sorrow settling into his bones. He watched the Ethelgard Empire, driven by an arrogant and fragile terror, prepare to breach the very wall that kept the cosmic predator at bay. Their 10,000 warships were charging their primary plasma engines to maximum capacity. They were radiating an energy signature so violent and brilliantly bright that it would undoubtedly pierce the veil and act as a dinner bell across the dimensions. The peaceful containment strategy, maintained meticulously for hundreds of years by humanity, had officially failed. They had tried to protect the Empire by keeping them quietly in the dark. But the Empire was fiercely determined to light a roaring fire in a room filled with explosive gas. Andre ran a trembling hand over the pulsating control membrane of his vessel, He knew standard protocol required him to transmit an emergency alert to the human high command and await authorization. But the temporal window was far too narrow. By the time a specialized containment fleet arrived, the Ethelgard Armada would have already fired upon the barrier, tearing the dimensional membrane and dooming both species. There was no time for bureaucracy. Andre realized he had to act entirely independently. He had to step out of the shadows, intercept 10,000 warships alone, and personally stop the Empire from digging a grave for the entire known galaxy. The fabric of the cosmos trembled as the absolute might of the Ethelgard Empire tore through the warp matrix, materializing at the precipice of the dark matter veil. 10,000 dreadnoughts, a Leviathan armada of jagged titanium and pulsing plasma, blotted out the distant starlight. This was the Annihilation Protocol incarnate. It was a force designed not merely to conquer, but to erase entire star systems from the galactic ledger. Leading this apocalyptic swarm was Supreme Fleet Commander Kalen. His command bridge vibrating with the hum of thousands of hyperdrives operating at 100% capacity. Standing between this overwhelming tide of destruction and the invisible quarantine barrier was a single, insignificant anomaly. Andre Arnold's biological vessel drifted silently, a solitary grain of sand attempting to hold back an ocean. Kalen sneered at the tactical projection. The sheer audacity of the human vessel, standing its ground, fueled his imperial rage. "Lock all Star Killer batteries on that target!" Kalen roared, his voice echoing across the synchronized comms of 10,000 ships. "Burn it into atomic dust, fire." Space itself seemed to scream as the Armada unleashed its fury. 10,000 primary beams of superheated plasma, each capable of cracking a planetary crust, converged on the exact coordinate of the human ship. The energy output was so blindingly intense that it bleached the visual sensors of the Imperial dreadnoughts, stark white. It was a localized supernova, a concentrated focal point of raw, unadulterated annihilation. Kalen braced for the inevitable shockwave, anticipating the satisfying debris cloud of his obliterated enemy. But the shockwave never came. The blinding white light did not scatter. It did not explode outward. Instead, it was dragged violently inward, spiraling down a terrifyingly steep gravitational funnel. The colossal kinetic and thermal energy of 10,000 Starkillers simply vanished, swallowed whole by the silent void. As the optical sensors recalibrated, Kalen felt the blood drain entirely from his face. The human vessel had not been destroyed. It had fed on the attack, fueled by the immense energy it had just absorbed. The biological ship began to undergo a horrifying geometric metamorphosis. The jagged, organic shard began to unfold, expanding at an impossible, exponential rate. It defied the conservation of mass, pulling dark matter directly from the surrounding quarantine veil to fuel its growth. Within seconds, the single vessel split, fracturing cleanly along lines of pure mathematics. 1 became 2, 2 became 4, 4 became 16. The multiplication was relentless, silent, and terrifyingly swift. Before the Imperial gunners could even recharge their secondary capacitors, the space surrounding the Armada was completely saturated. Millions of perfectly symmetrical dark matter cubes now floated in the void, forming a colossal, hyperdimensional lattice. The 10,000 Imperial warships were no longer an invading force. They were perfectly surrounded from every conceivable angle, trapped within a geometric cage of absolute darkness. Panic, raw and unfiltered, erupted across the Imperial command network. "Evasive maneuvers," Kalen screamed, his prior arrogance shattering into pure terror. "All ships, break formation, fire at will, clear a path." The dreadnoughts fired indiscriminately, in all directions, their secondary cannons spewing rapid streams of antimatter across the void. But the fundamental laws of physics had been rewritten within the lattice. As Kalen watched his tactical display, a profound, mind-breaking madness took hold. An antimatter torpedo fired by the ship on his port flank traveled in a straight line, entered the proximity of a dark matter cube, and instantly altered its trajectory by 90 degrees without losing any momentum. The space within the cage was no longer Euclidean. It was scrambled. Imperial weapons fired forward, only to loop back through warped dimensional corridors and pass directly through their own hulls. Ships charged their engines to ram the cubes, only to find themselves endlessly accelerating in a localized loop, never moving an inch relative to the cage. They were ghosts haunting their own coordinates, their attacks rendering zero damage, passing through each other like illusions in a distorted mirror. The horrifying realization descended upon the Supreme Fleet Commander and his 10,000 crews simultaneously. The Ethelgard Empire had spent millennia building massive armadas, forging millions of tons of armor, and conscripting billions of soldiers. They believed warfare was a matter of scale, but humanity had long ago realized that building fleets was a primitive waste of resources. Humanity did not need an armada. They only needed to construct one single vessel, capable of self-replication and capable of altering the fundamental constants of physics. Why fight a war when you can simply change the rules of the universe so that your enemy cannot exist? Aboard his command matrix, now decentralized across millions of geometric nodes, Andre Arnold initiated the final phase of containment. He reached out with his mind, interfacing with the quantum probability fields, and gently pulled the drawstring. The space containing the Ethelgard Armada detached. To Kalen and his 10,000 crews, the distant stars suddenly blinked out of existence. The faint, cosmic background radiation flatlined. The navigational computers screamed in error, unable to locate any galactic anchor points. The communication relays broadcasted only dead, empty static. They had not been destroyed, but they were no longer in the universe. Andre Arnold had neatly excised the entire volume of space containing the Grand Fleet, folding it into a sealed, impenetrable pocket dimension. They were a ship in a bottle, cast adrift outside of reality, completely incapable of escaping or calling for help. The absolute might of the Empire had been neutralized without a single casualty, swallowed by the terrifying quiet supremacy of the human mind. The Grand Armada was locked away, entirely removed from the physical plane. Yet the catastrophic danger they had summoned was already clawing at the threshold. Andre Arnold, isolated within the central command node of his expanding dark matter lattice, knew the pocket dimension was only a temporary bandage. The massive, violent energy spike from the Imperial weapons had already acted as a blinding cosmic beacon. The Predator was here. Realizing that physical intervention was no longer sufficient, Andre bypassed every digital firewall, every quantum encryption protocol, and every psychic defense mechanism of the Ethelgard Empire. He did not hack their networks. He simply tapped into the universal biological frequency that bound all conscious life. Across thousands of colonized star systems, trillions of Imperial citizens abruptly stopped. A profound, echoing silence filled their minds, followed immediately by a vivid, shared, and horrifying vision. Andre projected his consciousness, along with the raw telemetry of the void, directly into the neural pathways of the entire empire. He showed them the unvarnished truth. In the minds of the citizens, the fabric of the sky ripped open. They witnessed the transdimensional parasite. It was not an opposing fleet or a rival empire, but a colossal, formless hunger. It was a shifting mass of jagged anti-light and screeching gravitational waves, tearing through the delicate membrane of reality. It was drawn by the scent of war, lured from the deep abyss by the blinding plasma fire of their own trapped armada. The citizens felt the pure, freezing dread of the entity, a cosmic predator that did not conquer planets, but simply consumed their fundamental energy. They saw, with absolute clarity, that the sheer arrogance of their Supreme Council had invited a true apocalypse. "We are all children wandering in the dark," Andre's voice echoed gently in the minds of trillions, transcending all barriers of language and species. "And to survive, we must learn to be quiet." To seal the dimensional breach, the universal mathematics required a profound anchor. It required a localized mass of infinite density and a living consciousness capable of directing its collapse. Andre Arnold made the quiet, solitary choice to become that anchor. He deliberately disabled the safety limiters on his biological ship. The millions of dark matter cubes began to fold back in on themselves, compressing inward with agonizing physics breaking force. He was sacrificing his extraordinary vessel, his advanced neural matrix, and his very life. The living ship seemed to weep, leaking tears of luminescent quantum fluid as it crushed its own core, generating a perfectly controlled, localized artificial black hole. The resulting singularity did not ravage the surrounding star systems. It was a masterpiece of tragic, precise engineering. The black hole blossomed at the exact focal point of the dimensional tear. It instantly devoured the vanguard wave of the screeching parasite, dragging the cosmic horror down into an inescapable event horizon, silencing its hunger forever, simultaneously. The singularity siphoned off the residual weapon energy, radiating from the sealed pocket dimension, draining the aggressive signatures that had attracted the beast in the first place. The scales of the universe were forcefully reset to a perfect, peaceful equilibrium. And miraculously, not a single Imperial soldier inside the pocket dimension perished. Andre had neutralized their weapons and spared them all, paying the ultimate price so that an empire of strangers might live. The vision slowly faded from the minds of the Ethelgard citizens, leaving behind a profound, earth-shattering grief. They had just watched a solitary member of a species they considered primitive mud-dwellers sacrifice his own existence to save their entire civilization from a threat their own leaders had provoked. That collective realization turned instantly into a blinding, righteous, planetary fury. The streets of the capital world erupted. Billions of citizens stormed the absolute command spire. The Royal Guard, having experienced the exact same telepathic truth, lowered their weapons and joined the rising tide. The arrogant Supreme Council was dragged from their freezing chamber, their reign of aggressive ignorance violently and permanently terminated in a single, unified uprising. Deep beneath the planetary crust, the heavy iron doors of the subterranean dungeon were cast open. The people brought resolute assassin Vale up into the light, not as a disgraced prisoner, but as the only leader who had seen the truth and tried to warn them. Elevated by popular demand to the newly formed position of prime emissary, Vile wasted no time. He journeyed directly to the edge of the quarantine zone, to the exact site of the anomaly, which was now marked only by a silent, stable spatial scar. There, he met with the true representatives of Earth. He did not come with dreadnoughts or demands, but with open hands and an oath of eternal peace. The long, bloody era of imperial conquest ended that day, replaced by a bright new epoch of cosmic survival, built fundamentally on profound gratitude and mutual respect. Thank you so much, our wonderful listeners, for staying with us through the very end of this journey. We would love to know where you are listening to this story from, so please let us know in the comments. If you found today's story engaging and meaningful, please consider helping us out with just $1. You can easily do this by scanning the PayPal QR code on your screen, or by using the PayPal link provided in the video description or the pinned comment. Your generous support allows us to pay our dedicated staff, helping them feed their families, and ensuring we can continue crafting and sharing these amazing sci-fi stories with all of you. Thank you, and see you in the next adventure.